On March 10, 2012, a burned 18-year-old girl was brought to a hospital in Mykolaiv. Her burns were so severe that in some areas of her body there was almost no skin or muscle left, and some of her bones had literally turned to ash. Despite this, the girl was still conscious and later was even able to tell the whole country about the crime she had fallen victim to. That's terrible. A little earlier that same day, a resident of Mykolaiv, Oksana, was planning to visit his sick mother in the hospital. However, his car wouldn't start, so he crossed the road and stopped near the fence of a long-abandoned construction site located on the main avenue, which used to be called Lenin Avenue. So, Ole hoped that some kind people passing by would help him push the car. But it was a post-holiday day off, so the man stood on the street for about 10 or 15 minutes, but no one came to help. All this time, Ole felt like he could hear very quiet moans and pleas for help. The sounds were so faint that the man at first thought he was just imagining them, so he didn't react in any way. Ole didn't dare go behind the fence to check if someone really needed help there. As a local resident, he knew well that there were many aggressive stray dogs living at that construction site, and the site itself is considered a dangerous place. However, when he later realized that the calls for help were real, he decided to contact the police after all. According to him, just 3-4 minutes after the call to 122 police officers arrived at the scene and went to check the construction site.
They come out of there looking shocked. You should have seen the eyes of that officer, a local, about 20 years old. They open the trunk and it's a terrible horror. There's a raped, naked, covered in soot young girl.
Soon, several more police crews arrived at the scene. At the same time, it took the medics a whole 40 minutes to arrive after being called. This was also mentioned by Ole, who noted that the emergency hospital was very close to the crime scene. Still 40 minutes. While everyone was waiting for medical help, the girl was pulled out of the construction waste pit where she was found and covered with a warm blanket. The victim was even able to stand up, but because her legs were badly burned, she immediately fell down. Nevertheless, she remained conscious, was able to speak, and talked about what had happened the day before. She even named the people who had treated her so cruelly. Just a few hours later, Tetiana Surovitska received a phone call. The woman was told her daughter, Oksana Makar, had been discovered at a Mykolaiv construction site. She had become the victim of a brutal crime and was now in the hospital in extremely serious condition. Who is Oksana Makar and what did she tell law enforcement and how were her offenders punished? I will now tell you everything step by step. So, Oksana was born in June 1993 in Mykolaiv. It can be said that her mother, Tetiana, raised her daughter on her own since the girl's father was a repeat thief and spent many years of his life behind bars. But why did I use the phrase "it can be said" regarding the mother's upbringing? The thing is, Tetiana Surovitska also had 2 convictions in her past. As a result, Oksana's mother was imprisoned for several years. And this imprisonment of her mother happened when her daughter was still very young. According to some sources, at that time the responsibility for raising the girl fell on her grandfather. Others claim that Oksana was sent to a boarding school where she felt very bad. She even ran away from there 3 times. One way or another, after her release, Tetiana found a job in Kyiv and took Oksana to the capital. It was there that the girl finished school, and then she returned to Mykolaiv region, to the village of Luch. They settled in her grandparents' house, who had already passed away. It is also known that for 3 years prior to the crime, Oksana was actively engaged in boxing. According to acquaintances, she was always quite athletic and energetic in life. Later on, the doctors who would fight for the girl's life would describe her as very balanced. Even after what she went through, she didn't panic and behaved very steadily and appropriately as much as was possible in those circumstances. On March 9, 2012, Oksana went to Mykolaiv to continue celebrating International Women's Day. In the evening, around 10 p.m., she entered a local bar called Rybka. The bartender, Natalia, who was on shift that day, knew the girl well, but didn't speak very positively about her.
She was very promiscuous and liked to flirt with men. She approached people asking for 2 hryvnias for juice, claiming she couldn't afford beer. The girl behaved promiscuously, constantly sitting next to guys or even adult men. They were always chasing her away.
According to Ms. Natalia, that evening Oksana sat down with 2 men who were spending time at the establishment. These men were 23-year-old Yevhen Krasnoshchuk and 22-year-old Artem Pogoshin. It is known that Krasnoshchuk left home at the age of 17, worked as a security guard, and lived with his common-law wife and their 1-year-old daughter. In contrast, Pogosyan seemed to come from a more influential family. His father, who died shortly before the crime we will discuss, had worked either as a prosecutor or as a deputy prosecutor in one of the districts of Mykolaiv during his lifetime. Another version claims Pogosyan's parents were ordinary people, his mother a librarian and his father working mostly in Russia. Either way, shortly after Oksana joined these young men, she turned to Natalia.
Give me 50 grams of vodka. I said no, I won't give you any. Well then, juice. All right, I said. 5 hryvnias for the juice, and she told me, the boys will pay. And the boys replied, listen, you haven't worked it off yet for me to pay for you.
According to Natalie, about an hour later, the girl left the bar with the men. The employee of the establishment thought at the time that they were heading to the local disco, but here's what Oksana Makar herself said about that evening. She drank only 1 shot of cognac with the young men, after which she began to have memory lapses. The girl is convinced that an unknown substance was mixed into her drink. In that state, it was very hard for Oksana to resist Yevhen and Artem, who were actively, let's say, insisting on accompanying her. However, instead of taking her to the disco or helping Oksana get home, the men took her to the apartment of their acquaintance, 24-year-old Maxim Proceedings, the adopted son of the former head of the district administration. At that time, Maxim had been working for about 3 months as a lawyer in the Mykolaiv City Council's Department of Culture. He had apparently been showing signs of interest in Oksana for a long time and tried to start a relationship with her, but every time he was rejected. Once she was in his apartment, Oksana felt worse and worse. And soon the girl fell asleep and later woke up to find herself in a real-life nightmare.
I remember the bar, how we were going to visit someone. Then I blacked out. It's all a blur. I remember being strangled, and when I regained consciousness, I remember lying there all night. I thought I wouldn't survive. Tila had dinner. I began to pray, feeling as if I had died. My memories of that time are hazy, like a fog.
Later, Yevhen Krasnoshchuk himself said during one of the interrogations that after the group entered the apartment, he suggested, in his own words, to the extremely drunk girl that they have sex. However, she refused. When Oksana fell asleep, the men took advantage of the situation. They raped the girl who, at some point, woke up and realized what was happening. She started screaming and threatening the rapists with the police. By the way, Proceedings' neighbors heard loud screams coming from his apartment that evening, but decided not to report them to the police. Next is a quote from Yevhen Krasnoshchuk.
I raped her. Well, and then...
She didn't calm down, sort of.
I decided to suppress it.
After that, all 3 men went outside to look for a place for the body. That's a quote. They returned after half an hour to a place for the body, but Oksana was still alive. Krasnoshchuk took a wire and started strangling the girl with it again. When the killers thought that Oksana was dead, they wrapped the body in a sheet, took 2 pillowcases with them, and carried everything outside. Near the entrance, Krasnoshchuk, who was carrying Oksana, dropped her on the ground. She showed no signs of life at that moment. And at that moment, the criminals seemed to be completely convinced that they were dealing with a corpse. Then they carried Oksana's body to a construction site and threw her into a pit filled with garbage. After that, they set pillowcases on fire, threw them next to what they thought was a corpse, and just left. However, just 5 minutes later, Krasnoshchuk decided to come back. He wanted to take an important piece of evidence, the bedsheet, which might have traces of semen on it. According to him, the girl was already on fire at that moment, but despite this, she still showed no signs of life. Another person involved in the case, Artem Pogosyan, also shared his version of the events. He met Proceedings and Krasnoshchuk on the very day of the crime. On March 9, he started drinking in the morning because he was mourning his father who had died 40 days earlier.
I have an acquaintance named Serhiy. That day I called him around 2 o'clock. He worked at the Kolos market. I went there and found Krasnoshchuk sitting with him. We got acquainted. Then Serhiy closed the shop and the three of us went for a walk. Under threat, Krasnoshchuk contacted the juror. At 1:15, we all went to the Orange Bar together.
Soon, Serhiy left the group and Pogosyan continued drinking with his new friends. The three of them went to Prishizhnuk's apartment. They also drank alcohol there. Then the group decided to go to Rybka, the same bar, but Prishizhnuk said he would stay at home. According to Pogosyan, Oksana was already drunk when they met, and it was she who took the initiative by coming up to them. The men didn't take the girl seriously because of her young age and her state of intoxication. They sat together for about 15-20 minutes and then left because Oksana supposedly started dancing and behaving inappropriately, whatever that means. Pogosyan wanted to take her home, but she refused. Then Krasnoshchuk suggested that they all go to Prisyazhnuk's place. On the way, the young people stopped by a store. There, they bought vodka and condoms. Krasnoshchuk allegedly purchased all of this. Prisyazhnuk didn't pay any attention to the guest at all when everyone came to his place. The group started drinking, then Oksana went to the bathroom, and after that to the bedroom. Then Krasnoshchuk handed out condoms to everyone and went to the girl. After that, Prisyazhnuk and Krasnoshchuk took turns going to the room and raping Oksana. According to Pogosyan, he did not take part in this.
Then Prisyazhnuk comes back and Krasnoshchuk goes again, but he wasn't there for long. One of them tells me to go. I go automatically. I enter the room. Oksana is sitting on the couch. Because she's walking around naked, since you can't throw a sheet over from above. I sat on the edge of the couch, and she reached out to me. I felt a kind of disgust when she went to the bathroom. It seemed to me that she went to throw up. Besides, before that Krasnoshchuk was a juror. I pushed her away from me a little. She staggered like a person who is intoxicated. Then she started complaining, saying that she felt bad from what she had drunk.
At that moment, Krasnoshchuk and Prisyazhnuk entered the room again. Pogosyan and the latter went back to the kitchen to drink, while Krasnoshchuk stayed in the room. Soon, the men who were drinking in the kitchen heard a noise coming from the room where Oksana and Krasnoshchuk were. This noise lasted for 10 to 15 minutes. Before Pogosyan and Prisyazhnuk finally decided to enter the room and check what was happening. That's when they saw their friend strangling the girl.
We hurried to him. "What are you doing?" He removed his hands, saying, "That's it." And I remember the moment when her tongue fell out and it seemed like she was already dead. We went to the kitchen with Prisyazhnuk and started discussing what had happened, while Krasnoshchuk stayed in the room. But he stayed there for only a few minutes. Then there was a strange clicking sound, and Krasnoshchuk came in and said to me, "If you make a move, you'll follow her." Later, I realized what the clicking sound was. Krasnoshchuk had locked the door so I couldn't leave.
As Pogosyan said, he didn't want to take part in the crime. However, he was allegedly forced to. Frightened, he helped cover up the traces and didn't go to the police because he was afraid of Krasnoshchuk's threats and that the police would blame everything on him. Perhaps the men would have managed to avoid punishment, but Oksana Makar survived and was able to testify against her abusers. Soon after the girl was found, all three suspects in the crime were detained. They admitted their involvement, but in fact, they only partially acknowledged their guilt. On March 12, it became known that Pogosyan and Prisyazhnuk were released on their own recognizance. At that time, the names of all case participants had not been officially disclosed. Despite this, the media quickly found out that local privileged youths were involved in the abuse of Oksana and spread this information. The details of the case were so horrific that, without exaggeration, they attracted the attention of almost all residents of Ukraine. So when people found out that two suspects in such a brutal crime had been released, the public was extremely outraged. People went out to protest, and as a result, on March 13, Pogosyan and Prisyazhnuk were detained again and placed in custody in the detention center where Krasnoshchuk was being held. Despite this, the protests continued as people feared the privileged suspects would escape justice. In addition, it became known that on the day Oksana Makar was found at the construction site, another girl, 18-year-old Alexandra Popova, was discovered beaten nearly to death in a park in the center of Mykolaiv. This news further intensified public outrage, and the protesters demanded justice for both girls. At the same time, doctors were actively fighting for Oksana's life. Her condition was extremely serious, as 55% of her body was burned, with a significant portion affected by 3rd and 4th degree burns.
Oksanoshka is currently in the intensive care unit. At first, the doctors gave her a 2% chance, now it's 0.5%. Doctors say her kidneys are completely cooked, and in their 30 years of practice, they've never seen anything like it. They said people usually die within 2 or 3 hours, even with less severe burns. And Oksanoshka has 55% burns.
On March 12, Oksana had to have her arm amputated. She also had burns on her torso, thigh, lower back, and feet. On the 15th, she was put into an induced coma. Earlier, the girl gave a short phone interview to the UA newspaper's website.
I feel bad. I can barely feel my body. Doctors say being unconscious would be easier for me, but like this, I see, understand, and feel everything. However, that's good. I'm conscious and determined to survive. They say my chances are good, and I will try my absolute hardest.
The next day, it was decided to transfer the girl to the Donetsk Burn Center. That evening, Oksana underwent surgery and was transferred to Donetsk for skin graft preparation. On March 18, it turned out that because the girl had spent a long time lying outside, she developed pneumonia. Doctors discovered several more extremely horrific injuries in Oksana's body. The head of the Donetsk Burn Center told journalists about this.
The truth is bitter. It's even worse than I expected. We continue to work, but the prognosis is not just bad, it's extremely bad. Her rectum is burned, the gluteal muscles, tendons, and the hip joint are damaged. Bilateral pneumonia has developed, and her lungs have almost completely disappeared.
On March 20, Oksana underwent surgery to remove dead tissue. For several more days, the hospitals fought for her life. However, despite all their efforts and the girl's strong will to live, on March 29, 2012, Oksana Makar's heart could not endure and stopped. Throughout this period, Ukrainians raised funds for Oksana, which were transferred to her mother Tetiana's account. After her daughter's death, the woman promised to transfer all the funds. According to reports, this amount was about $80,000 to Alexandra Popova, a victim of a crime who was found on the same day and in the same city as Oksana Makar. According to Alexandra's relatives, Tetiana broke her promise. And with the money received from caring people, as her own neighbors noted, she began to lead a reckless lifestyle. In general, this woman was known for her scandalous reputation. There were rumors in the press that during her lifetime, she forced her daughter into prostitution, and in 2016, Tetiana was caught stealing in a store. However, there are many peculiar tales about Oksana's mother that could be discussed at length. So that's it, I've just given you a summary of the major scandals. And now let's get back directly to her daughter's case. So, after Oksana Makar died, the charges against the suspects were reclassified from attempted murder to intentional murder. At that time, Yevhen Krasnoshchuk withdrew his initial testimony, in which he had previously confirmed information that he raped and strangled the girl. Now the man claimed that one of the detention center employees forced him to take the blame. He allegedly promised the man money if he would use his testimony to cover for another defendant, Maxim Prisyaznyuk. Krasnoshchuk even named the law enforcement officer who made him this offer. Representatives of the Prosecutor General's office promised in court to investigate this statement, but it's unclear if they followed through. Such confessions by Krasnoshchuk fueled the rumors that had already been circulating around the case. Back on March 21, an article was published in the publication Korotko Pro. In it, an anonymous source from the police, now called the Police, reported that the attack on Oksana was premeditated and prepared in advance, specifically by Maxim Prisyaznyuk. The man allegedly really tried to start a relationship with Oksana, and when she, so to speak, refused such a rich and influential person, it made Maxim very angry. So much so that he decided to rape and kill the girl. According to the same source, Prisyaznyuk contacted Krasnoshchuk through social networks and arranged the crime with him. It is also reported that, as part of the plan, Prisyaznyuk deliberately did not go to the Rybka bar that day, trying to provide himself with an alibi. However, all this information has never been officially confirmed. And even Krasnoshchuk himself, although he publicly blamed Prisyaznyuk, never confirmed the story that the murder was planned in advance. On June 12, 2012, court hearings in this case began. They were held in an open session. In court, Pogozhin and Prisyaznyuk usually sat quietly and humbly. However, Krasnoshchuk could exchange words with the latter, behaving quite defiantly in contrast. At one point, he even started joking and applauding. Overall, the accused changed their testimonies several times, shifted the blame onto each other, and at times denied everything altogether. At some point, Krasnoshchuk and Prisyaznyuk claimed that they did not rape the girl. Not.
There was no rape. I can't watch this madness. I'm losing my mind. How much more can I take?
Krasnoshchuk said, hinting that the intimacy between him and Oksana was consensual. The man also denied the arson and said that he had previously lied about strangling the victim. The only thing the defendant and his accomplices agreed on was that they took the body to the construction site. Lawyer and president of the Human Rights Defense League, Ihor Hoditsky, supported their testimony.
If she is sober, they are rapists. And if her tongue wasn't tied, then how can she remember whether it was voluntary or not?
In his opinion, that evening, the guys made an agreement with the girl about intimacy, paid for it, treated her to alcohol, discussed everything, and after the act, Oksana supposedly started threatening them with the police.
She had been drinking alcohol before, so how could she have reacted after receiving such news?
As TSN notes, this lawyer tried in every possible way to justify the defendant, attributed the victim's injuries to role-playing games, claimed that she only suffered minor bodily harm, and in the end even put forward a wild version that the guys made a fire that evening or that Oksana didn't freeze. Fortunately, such versions were not taken into account, and on November 27, 2012, the Central District Court of Mykolaiv found the men guilty and sentenced Yevhen Krasnoshchuk to life imprisonment. At the same time, Maxim Prisyaznyuk was sentenced to 15 years in prison and his friend Artem Pogoshin to 14 years. In May 2017, Pogoshin and Prisyaznyuk had their prison terms recalculated and reduced by almost a year. Thus, the first will be released in 2026 and the second will be free in 2027. Krasnoshchuk also tried to change his sentence. He appealed to the court with a motion to review his case. On August 6, 2019, the Central District Court of Mykolaiv considered this motion. During the hearing, a real scandal broke out as Krasnoshchuk shifted the blame from himself and accused Oksana's mother of her own daughter's death.
You could have saved her. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You're the father. You're the father. This is your southern sentence.
Mrs. Tetiana herself asked Krasnoshchuk why he took all the blame and thus covered for the two rich kids who made him the scapegoat for Buvailo. To this, the prisoner smiled and replied that he had no choice. But he isn't eager to get out because he's fine here in prison too. In the end, the court decided to deny Yevhen Krasnoshchuk's request to review the case. So for now, his sentence still remains in force. Well, my dears, that's the kind of chilling case we have today, as she said. Take care of yourselves, your family, and your loved ones. See you in the next video. Thank you.